Aloha and welcome to this screencast where I'm going to go through Experience 61, where we're going to add some tests to Meteor Application Template React. I actually like testing. I think it's kind of fun to do and to use Test Cafe. So hopefully you'll find that true yourself as you start to use it. So the first thing we need to do for this experience is to create a copy of Meteor Application Template React called Test Cafe-test. And that's just the standard thing we've been doing all semester. We'll go to Meteor Application Template React, use it as a template, create a private repo called Test Cafe-test, clone it to laptop, Meteor npm install, Meteor npm run start, go to localhost, IntelliJ project called Test Cafe. So I just already did that. Because you don't need to see me do that stuff anymore, right? Right. Okay, but now we're going to run the existing Test Cafe tests. And here's where things get more interesting. I haven't shown you this, this aspect of the system before, but you can see inside the app directory there is a subdirectory called tests, and it has some code in it. And the test directory is where all of the Test Cafe test code is going to be placed. And interestingly enough, Meteor ignores everything inside the test directory, which is good news because these Test Cafe tests, as you start to look at them, they have nothing to do with Meteor. That's also a really interesting aspect of doing acceptance testing and using Test Cafe is that there's nothing about the test that we're going to write that depends upon the fact that we have a Meteor application. Okay, so the actual web application could be written in any language. We don't care. We write tests that basically bring up a robot browser and send commands at it. So the skills you're going to be learning with respect to Test Cafe are independent of the fact that you're using Meteor. And so when you go on, if you're doing a web application in some other language, Django or Spring or whatever, this knowledge of how to do acceptance testing with Test Cafe will be equally as useful to you. So I'm happy about that aspect of this module. Anyway, in the test directory, there's a bunch of tests for just a small portion of the Meteor Application Template React stuff. So, and in fact, these are kind of the generic pages that are in all applications. There's a landing page, there's a nav bar, sign in, sign out, sign up. Okay. So I wanted to give you some tests to show as a model for how things work, and so you can run the tests when you are using this, but also leave some space for you to build some new tests. And we're going to build just a couple new tests in this experience. Okay, the next thing you want to know is that in package.json there's a couple scripts. There's a test cafe-development and a test cafe. Okay, the difference between them, the most obvious difference, is that one of them seems to have this thing called headless, and then there's this --app. Okay, the difference is that if you run meteor npm run test cafe, the system will churn for a while. It will magically bring up a version of our of this system using meteor npm run start, run the tests on it, all in the background. You don't see anything. And then it'll end and you'll either have passing tests or failing tests, which is great when, particularly as you see when we go into a continuous integration scenario where there's some remote server in the cloud somewhere that's going to be doing the tests. But when we're doing development, we'd actually like to be able to watch the tests run, okay? Because that gives us a lot of info about whether things are good or not. And this Test Cafe development script is the one that, come on, mouse, that is useful in this context. Now, the difference, you can see there's not this --app thing, and that's a hint that when you run this Test Cafe development script, it expects the web app, the server of the web app to be running so that when you go to localhost 3000, which is specified right here, something should pop up on your screen. Okay, so for the first part of this, what we're going to do is in one console window, we're going to have the server running, and we just leave it there. It's just going to be running, and then we have to bring up another console window, and that's when we run our command to our testing command that will actually bring up a robot browser, I call it, and execute commands against the running server. Okay, whoops. No, I don't want to bring up Discord. Sorry about that. Okay. So let's go back here. So, all right. Yeah. Okay, so let's try running the test cafe. We're going to do meteor npm run test cafe development. And we're going to do that in our second console window over here, not the one that's running the server, because the one that's running the server is, running the server. So if we do that, let's see what happens. So this browser pops up and it runs, and you see it briefly display, and it logs in someone, and then it it stops execution, and we can see that 2 test cases passed. Okay, so let's see what the heck actually happened by looking at the source code. Okay, well, the script says run test cafe, here test cafe development, run test cafe using the Chrome browser over all the file, and use as your test files all the files in the test directory that have the suffix testcafe.js. Now we only have one of these in this directory, but I make the command with a wildcard, because as you get more and more complicated tests, you may want to have multiple testcafe.js files, maybe one for each page, or I don't know how you want to split it up. Really doesn't make any difference, but for this simple situation, we just have one. So if we go in here, let's briefly look through this. We have, I have a credential, variable which provides our default username and password if we want to log in. And then test cafe tests require this fixture declaration that specifies the page where the browser is going to go to initially in order to start executing commands. And then we have this first test that landing page shows up, and it's going to await. So we have this async await mechanism which enables essentially the ability for the functions to run and return sometime later. Okay, we can. I don't want to go into details about this now because it's kind of a complicated topic, but all you need to do is just follow the boilerplate structure of these tests, where essentially you make a copy of this outer test thing, and then if you prefix all of your commands by await, it should be fine. Okay, so anyway, we have one test that says the first test, await landing page.is displayed. Now we import landing page from this landing.page file, and this brings up this idea of the page object model, okay, which is that we want to make our test code easy to understand. We want to be able to reuse code. So for example, the nav bar, we're going to be using the nav bar a lot to do various things in various tests because we want to click on links and so forth. And so we'd like to basically be able to reuse code. We'd also like to associate code with components. And so the page object model says, look, if you want to put all your code for a given page in a class and then use methods on that class to manipulate that specific page. So here's an example for the landing page. And the idea is that the way I'm using the page object model, the constructor is always going to include essentially a selector, which I use the ID property or the ID tag, and that's what that hashtag means, to indicate whether or not you're on the page that the class indicates. So if we actually look at the landing page, okay, look at that, right? ID equals landing page. So we in our code, we're going to kind of decorate the React components with IDs that enable Test Cafe to search for those IDs to determine things, to determine the location of forms, to determine what page we're on, and so forth. So this landing page class has a method called isDisplayed. It's an async method. Just put that on there, okay? And then inside, it's going to await. Put that as whenever you have like a test controller method invocation, you want to have await, and you're going to expect to see that this page selector exists. So essentially, each time you make a new class to provide a new page class for an existing application, what I would do is I would start off by just copying like the landing page class into this, into a new file, name it the name of the page you're going to use, make sure that you change the ID, make sure you populate the code for the React component with that ID, and you're kind of off to the races for that specific page. You now have an isDisplayed method that enables you to check to make sure that the robot browser guy has navigated to the page that you think you should be on. And if they haven't, if the page doesn't display or the link went somewhere different, then this test will fail, or the isDisplayed assertion will fail. Okay, so let's see what else we want to review. So we've got the testcafe.js. We talked about that. It's got the fixture command and 2 test cafe test commands. Now I do provide here links into the Test Cafe documentation. You're definitely going to want to, kind of spend some time, even though I think, there's a lot of just looking at my code will teach you a lot about how to do the Test Cafe tests. Still going to have to reference, the Test Cafe documentation at times to do things that you don't see from my examples. Although hopefully between Bofolios and this meteor-application-template-react, I don't know that you'll need to. Well, there could be situations, but 90% of what you'll need to do, you'll see examples of how to do it in either Bofolios or this. Okay, so we talked about this page object model. If we go back here, you can see navbar provides a component that manipulates the navigation bar, so we can check to make sure that you're logged out of the browser. If you happen to be logged in, you can go to this. You can click on a link to drop down the login drop down, and then click on the sign in button in that drop down menu. You can check to see that there's a logged in user by looking at the top right piece of the nav bar to see if there's a current user specified there, and that username matches the username that's passed. You can log out, and you can go to the sign in page or the sign up page. Okay, so take a look at this. Sign in page. We've got a sign in function where we check to make sure we're on the sign in page first, and then we type some text into the email control of the sign in form, and then we type some text into the password controller of the sign in form, and then we click the submit button, and then we check to make sure via the nav bar that we're actually now logged in. Okay, so hopefully as you start to look at this, it will start to become comfortable to you, and you'll see, this is pretty straightforward, writing tests to manipulate the browser. Okay, so we've reviewed the tests, and we've noticed that we have these ID fields, so it's, it might be worth just looking at the navbar component to see that there are IDs various places. Not every place that you'll need. There are some places where you're going to need IDs that aren't there now, but for all the operations that come by default with this. We've populated, put IDs every place we need to. Okay, so our experience, so that's all kind of the prelude. Now we're actually going to start the testing. I don't have a time limit associated with this WAD. I just want you to go through it once, do it in the master branch. Take as long as you need. And the real test is basically going to be testing your actual final project. Okay, so we're going to start by adding a test for the list stuff page. Here's an example of what that page looks like. Notice that you've got to log in order to see the list stuff page. So that's one thing we've got to do. And then when we log in, we're going to make sure that there's a table there. And that it has at least a couple items in it. Okay, so the first thing is we're going to have to create a test case for list stuff. And so per the recommendations, I'll just copy this and then find the test.testcafe and put this in there. And we are going to get, for a little bit, we're going to get an ESLint error because this test controller is defined but never used, but we'll just let that happen. And then the next thing we're supposed to do is run our tests in development mode. And so what we do to do that is we go here and we take a sip of coffee because this takes 10 or 15 seconds to run. Okay, and you can see at the bottom of the screen it's kind of talking about what it's doing. Now we're logged in, and then finally we bring up that last one, and it doesn't do anything, as we know, but at least now we see test the list stuff page, that test passed, so at least this is a legal test, right? It doesn't do anything, but as far as Test Cafe is concerned, okay, you defined a test, it ran, no errors were shown, no errors were found, so it passed. Okay, so done. All right, create the goToListStuff method. So we're going to update the navbar test class with a method called goToListStuffPage. This method should click on the list stuff link in the navbar. You'll need to add an ID called navbar-liststuff to the navbar.jsx file. Okay, so we want a navbar. This is what we want. Get navbar goToListStuffPage test controller, and notice that the test is. I've augmented the test with signing in, going to the sign-in page and signing in, so that there should be a list stuff menu item in the navbar at this point because we have signed in. So go to list stuff page is going to be pretty simple. It should click on the list stuff link in the navbar. So the first thing, we want to add an ID called navbar-liststuff to the navbar.jsx file. So let's go to navbar.jsx and let's find the list stuff. Here's the list stuff menu item, and we'll say ID equals navbar-liststuff. Okay. And then once we've done that, now we can go to navbar.component.jsx, and it's going to be kind of like this one. So instead of, whoops, it's going to be kind of like that one. So let me start by just making this new. So it's go to list stuff page, and then we don't have to wait to ensure logout because we did log in, but we're going to click on what navbar list stuff. That's all we really need to do to go to the list stuff page is click on that. Now let's just make sure that navbar list stuff, there's the ID. Navbar list stuff, that looks the same to me. So go to list stuff page. Let's fix the. Okay. And so let's go back to here. Now we should update our test code to include this stuff. Funny. In the the test. So we can just kind of basically paste. So go to list stuff page. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a little trick. It's not in the documentation, but it's going to make things go a little faster, which is you can prefix. There's these two things you can add to the test command. You can say test.only, which says ignore all the other tests. And there is also a test.skip, which says execute all the tests except for this one. Okay, so we're going to add test.only because we know these other tests work. So we'll do this so that we can focus on the new test that we're writing, and things will take a little bit less time. So having done that, let's now go to this and let's run it and see if our tests run. Log in, and it passed. Okay, so we were able to go to the list stuff page. Okay, or we're able to click on that link and therefore execute the command to go to the list stuff page. But are we really there? Well, that's something I think we're going to take care of in a second. So now we're going to create the list stuff page test class. And after we're done, what we're going to do is we're going to check to make sure after we've clicked that link in the nav bar to go to the list stuff page that actually that page is actually displayed. Because maybe we've made an error in our React component for list stuff page and it doesn't display. We get some kind of React error. So this is a nice thing to do. Okay, so all we need is an isDisplayed method to check to make sure, and reading the instructions, we'll need to add an ID tag to the list stuff JSX component. So what we'll do is we'll start off and we'll go to the list stuff page and we'll add to the, I like to add it to the very top level thing. ID equals list stuff page. And then in our test, we have this landing page. I like, this is kind of a minimal one, so I like this one as as the basis for creating new, page object model based classes. So we'll call this liststuff.page.js. And sure, we'll add this stuff to Git. And now we're in list stuff, so we have to say list stuff page, list stuff page, new list stuff page. Okay, and then the ID looks like that, and we're done. Okay, now we've got that isDisplayed method. Super easy. Okay, so if we now, I guess we can use this. If we now add this single line to our test case, we'll now not only go to that, we'll not only click the link to go there, we'll also check to make sure that page is actually displayed. So let's list stuff page from list stuff page. Okay. All right, so let's go over here, run again. A little bit of coffee left. Okay, we click the login, we log in, and it passes. So, and you could actually even see, I think if you were looking fast, you could see that the actual page with the table did appear, very momentarily. All right, so that's good. Okay. Next thing is check to make sure that this page displays a table with at least 2 items. You'll want to review the Test Cafe selector count class. And the idea here is that we want to figure out that there are at least 2 rows, that the table exists and there are at least 2 rows in it. And what you can see is the format for this kind of thing is to create a variable where we create one of these Test Cafe selectors. We provide some kind of CSS indication of what elements in the HTML of the page should match the selector, so there can be multiple ones, and then we can call this count to return a count of them. And in this case, these guys were checking to make sure there were 3 of these things. Okay, so how are we going to do that in our current situation? And I think that the thing we want to do is actually sign in and take a look at this page. So John at foo.com. No, right? Change. Jeez. Okay, so here we are on the list of page, and this is where things, I really hope that you've gotten a little bit familiar with using Chrome Developer Tools. If not, this is a good chance, because when you're doing testing, I think it's really helpful to just see how the HTML on the page is actually organized after it's gone through the React rendering thing. And so this little button, select an element to inspect it, so we can click here, and then we could go to all sorts of things, but let's just go into this element. And what we can see is what the HTML actually looks like is we have a T body, and then we have a TR class for each of the 2 elements of this table. And so if we're trying to see that there is a table, then looking for the TR element is gonna be a good way to do that, because TR elements only make sense within a table. And then we could use that same trick of the selector count property to see that there's actually 2 of those. Okay, so let's go back here. And what we can see here is the goal is to have a has table method that accepts the test controller and then checks to make sure, using this kind of count thing, that that there are 2 rows in it. Okay, or at least 2 rows in it, because maybe at some point you've edited the database and you've added some elements to it and you forget to reset the database, so when you display this table there are actually more than 2 rows. It's kind of a it depends on the craft of test writing, right? So you could test to make sure that it's exactly 2 rows, and in which case you need to also ensure that you're using that default database exactly. On the other hand, you could say, you know what, I just want to make sure that this page displays correctly, and given that it's in all likelihood is at least 2 rows, but maybe more, I'll just check greater than or equal to 2, so that the table could have any number of rows in it, but the test is still testing the essential characteristic of what I'm concerned with, which is that there is a table there, it displays some stuff items. Okay, so how do we implement that? What we do is we go back to our list stuff page, and let's make a copy of this. So we assert that this page has a table with some rows, with at least 2 rows. Okay, so we'll say async, then we're going to change this to has table, and this line of code is not. What we're going to actually do is we're going to go back to the documentation, and we're going to say, okay, this is the line of code. We want something like this, but we want it for tables. Okay, so we're going to go, we want a const, and we're going to say something like, row count, and then the selector is just tr. Okay, so tr says when you see something like that, you're looking for an HTML element. So like this means select tr. Okay, on the other hand, if we put a dot in front of it, we're looking for a class named tr. So this would be like, you know, h class equals tr, you know, blah blah blah, right? And then if we said pound, then we're looking for something like HID equals TR. Okay, so there's pounds for IDs, there's periods to indicate classes, and then if you don't put anything in there, you're just looking for an HTML element. Okay, and in this case, just looking for the HTML element is like going to be good enough. All right, and then let's go back to here, because what we want to do is await. Well, I'll make a copy of this, and then we'll make it look better. So we're going to go await t expect. So t is really test controller. And then expect row count. And then instead of EQL, we're going to say greater than or equal to. And we want it to be greater than or equal to 2. Okay, and then we get rid of this line altogether. Okay, so there is our test case. And I'm trying to, there is a place in the documentation where it tells you all the different kinds of greater than or equal to, etc. But I'm not finding, oh wait, here it is, here they all are. So expect, EQL, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, match, blah, blah, blah. There's where all your expect clauses are in the documentation. Okay, so we're gonna say has table, and so then if we go here and we go back to where we are, we're gonna just add this line to the bottom. So test cafe. Now we're going to check to make sure that there is a table and that the table has at least 2 rows. So we go here. I should have made more coffee. Okay, we log in, we go to the list stuff page, and we checked and there were 2 rows, so this passes. Awesome. Okay, now, and that's it. Okay, so we've now basically tested the list stuff page. There's more than just the list stuff page, right? There's actually an add stuff page with a form. Okay, that's a whole different kettle of wax. To see how to test forms, which is quite straightforward, look at the Bofolios test cases, because in Bofolios we test every single page and we test editing stuff, you know, things, adding things, all that stuff is tested. So you can look at Bofolios for how to do that. But at any rate, at this point, we've added 1 test case, and the final thing is that we want to add these acceptance tests to continuous integration. Okay, so now we're going to try that other method, not Test Cafe development. We're going to try running Test Cafe, and it should look like this. But before we do that, I'm going to get rid of this test.only because we want to be able to test all our test cases. And then, so the second thing we have to do, doggone it, I didn't mean to do that, is we have to stop running the server in another window. If we didn't do that, then when this guy tries to bring up a server, the regular Test Cafe command, the port is already taken. 3000 is already taken by the process running in this window, and things will fail. So we'll get rid of that, and then we'll say meteor npm run test cafe. So this is our all-in-one command, and we're not going to see any exciting windows pop up or anything because we're using a headless version of the Chrome browser, and we're bringing up Meteor npm run start to actually bring up our application in the background. And this will take longer as well each time you run it, because each time you run it, you actually have to bring up a new Meteor, process. Okay, so it's faster to do it in development mode because the process is already running. Okay, so all of our tests pass. You'll notice this little unstable thing occur after the first test, and that's totally fine. That's because of the fact that what happens is, my understanding of why this is happening is because Test Cafe is actually trying to see if the landing page is there before Meteor has completed the process of bringing up the system. And so the first time it tries to check for that landing page to be available, it doesn't work. But because we run Test Cafe in this -Q or quarantine mode, it will actually try a few times before it gives up entirely. And so the second time it tries, things work fine. And so it marks it as unstable, saying, hey, one time when I ran it, it didn't work, but another time I ran it, it did work. Okay, and that's completely fine. If you see unstable for any of these other ones, that would be bad. But for the very first test case, in a situation with Meteor, it's completely okay for this first one to be unstable. Unstable means it did pass eventually, just that it failed one of the initial times that they tried. Okay, so let's go back here. So run Test Cafe ran exactly as we want. And so now we're going to edit the GitHub action file in GitHub Workflow CI to invoke this command, which is the meteor npm run test cafe. Okay, so the last 4 lines should be blah, 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 blah with this meteor npm run test cafe. So this is a cool thing that you might be seeing for the first time, which is that you're going to use this capability of GitHub called GitHub Actions to automatically, each time we push code to the master branch, to see that certain things have happened correctly. And one of those things is to run ESLint over our code. And then if we copy this and change this to Test Cafe, now we'll be able to see if our test cases pass or not. And this is an automatic thing that runs every time we push to master. So it's a great thing for team-based development. So let's go back here. Okay, so we've now added that line to our continuous integration. Commit the master branch to GitHub, then click on the Actions tab to see the execution of our updated workflow. Okay, so we'll go to GitHub Desktop, which is right here. And we look, yeah, all that stuff looks like it's the appropriate stuff to have changed. So add a test for list stuff, commit to the master branch. Okay, and now let's click on this to go to GitHub. Okay, we added a test for list stuff. And then if we click on Actions, what we can see is here's a workflow. They call it a workflow that's running. And if we click on that, we can see here's the workflow file, which is just a copy of what we saw. But more importantly, we can click on this link for build. And this gives us kind of a live update on the status of these commands. npm CI is the same as npm install, but more recommended in these workflow files, so I use that instead. Now we set up Meteor, so there's a command to install Meteor. So basically what's happening, if you don't know, at GitHub, when these workflow happens, they provision a little virtual Linux server that's got nothing really on it, and then we have to add node to this virtual server. We have to add Meteor to this server, and then we run meteor npm install to actually install our Test Cafe test application. And then we run lint to make sure I didn't run that locally. I'm glad that there weren't any lint errors. And finally, we do this meteor npm run Test Cafe, and you can kind of watch here as it runs. And I have no more coffee to drink, which is a shame. Okay, run. These little virtual Linux boxes that are run there, they're not provisioned with a lot of, you know, resources in terms of CPU or RAM or whatever. So things take a while to run, but we don't care because this is running at GitHub. It's no cost to us. And as long as it finishes eventually, which it will in probably a minute, then it's perfectly fine. I mean, you can't argue with free for this kind of stuff. There are other, kind of cloud-based continuous integration services. There's Semaphore, there's Circle CI, there's Travis. All of those are very reasonable alternatives. I like the GitHub one. It's the simplest one in my experience. So we can see that Test Cafe ran fine. We have these checkout applications that ran, and all of a sudden we get this little check mark indicating that our action was successful. So it's a green check mark, and if we go to code, what you can actually see is there's a little green check mark right there, and we can actually click it and say all checks have passed. Okay, and you could click that for the details. And then there's also this piece of code, which, let's see. Yeah, so this actually, unfortunately, is referring to not this system, but the other system. So let's just change this. This is also, something you should know about, right? And that is if we change that to be our account and then Test Cafe test, now that badge is gonna actually refer to, I think, to this specific system. What we would really need to do to kind of make sure is in this, you see this workflow is called CI. We should have changed that workflow to be CI Test Cafe test, and then we'd know for sure. And I just updated the README, so now I've made a commit to master, which means we're going to run this again over our code, but we won't worry about that. All right, so there you go. It took a while to get through it, but hopefully with all this additional information, you're ready to go out and start writing tests on your system. Very important for developing high quality software applications. And I think that Test Cafe is a great way to do it. So enjoy.